Hi, everybody. How's it going? Good, good. Okay, guys, I was doing some Adele karaoke in the car. I did something here. I don't know. I hit a note that I should not have hit. So bear with me, okay? I'm Alexis. I have been working with the NEC in varying capacities forever now, probably, I think, 2017? Currently, though, I am serving as the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Advisor with the conference. And what that means is that my job is to help make sure that the conference is doing everything in our power to make sure we're fostering inclusive environments and doing everything that I can do to assist your campuses in the same mission. What we're going to talk about today, I always kind of struggle to think about how to put together a DE&I training that gives you guys the information that you need, but also feels relevant to you and engaging. And since I'm kind of starting off here, I wanted to talk about a topic that I think we can all kind of relate to, and that's stereotypes in sport. So what we'll do today is kind of talk through some different stereotypes we see, talk about where those things might come from, and then we'll give some tips on how to address those things when we see them playing out. Okay, let's dive in. Does anybody know what this is? Yeah, this is a pool. Well, it's not a pool anymore, it's a field of grass, but this used to be a pool. This was a pool that was built in 1922, and it was desegregated in 1956. It did not open in 1957. And it didn't open in 1957 because at the time, the people in power, let's get uncomfortable, white people, decided that they would rather be hot in the summer than to share a pool with black people. And so this pool did not open in the summer of 1957. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because this pool closed the year that my grandmother was born, and it is located 5 miles from my house. I don't know how to swim. So let's think about, in 3 generations, a families, multiple families, this was a popular pool when it was open. If you don't have access, and then your kids don't have access, and then I don't have access, I don't know. Swimming to me just wasn't something that I grew up doing. What's the stereotype about black people and swimming? Yeah. Right, black people don't know how to swim. And that's kind of like a silly thing when you just hear it, right? Because obviously we know that there are black people who know how to swim. There are really talented black swimmers. But we also know that black children are 7 times more likely to drown than white children. And when asked about their comfortability with swimming, only 28% of black parents said that they were comfortable with their own swimming skills, compared to 56% of white parents. And so yes, some black people know how to swim. Some black people are excellent swimmers. But a lot of black people don't know how to swim. And so statistically, this stereotype feels a little bit accurate. But it's not that black people don't know how to swim because we had a committee meeting and decided, like, hey, we're going to sit this sport out, right? Generally, black people don't know how to swim because we didn't have access to pools. Stereotypes in sport. We're going to go over some guidelines today. Sorry, that font is a lot smaller than I thought it was going to be. We're going to go over some guidelines, just some rules for engagement here. We're going to talk through our goals for the session. We'll go through some definitions really quick just to make sure we're all on the same page with what we're talking about. We'll go through some stereotypes. We're going to have a lot of group discussion, kind of talking through different examples of stereotypes in sport, kind of going through maybe thinking about where some of those things came from, like we just did. And then we'll talk about like what we do next, right? So we'll talk about these things. How do we apply what we're going to learn today to the real world? Ground rules. Like, who was a little bit uncomfortable when I said that white people didn't want to swim with black people? You can go ahead and raise your hand. Who was? I was uncomfortable saying it to you guys, so I know some of you were probably uncomfortable hearing it, right? What we're going to talk about today isn't super fun stuff. It's uncomfortable, and it makes us think about our own identities and maybe some roles that we've played in perpetuating some of these stereotypes. So it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable. But it's important that we lean into that because the only way, and I mean, you guys probably hear this at practice all the time too, like you have to get past your comfort before we can start to see progress, right? We're going to listen to learn today. I know some of these topics can be really challenging and it might feel like, oh, I have to respond to this, let's just listen to learn today and listen to understand, not to necessarily respond or kind of argue back. That's not what we're here for. We're going to do a lot of talking in groups. Let's speak when we share our opinion from a place of empathy and kindness. It's okay if we don't say things 100% correct, if we don't know the right wording or what's most politically correct, but let's start just by speaking from a place of kindness. And then willingness. Let's commit to wanting to learn about this. Am I missing anything? Any rules that you guys that aren't up here that you feel like we should add? Okay. Goals. Why are we here? I could tell you my goals for this. I see and hear different stereotypes come into play, different microaggressions, we'll learn a little bit more about that, come into play on a regular basis. My goal for this is to help us identify what some of those things are and then give you the tools to disrupt those things when you see them happening. My goal also, I hope that you guys will have a little fun with me tonight. I promise some of this won't be as heavy. But I'd like to hear from you guys. And I understand the context of this, that you all were kind of given an agenda, so it's not really like you had a choice to listen to me talk tonight. But now that you know what we're going to be talking about, does anybody want to share maybe what they would like to hear from this session? I kind of gave you an overview of some of the things that we'll be talking about. What are some of your goals or some things that you'd like to hear more about? Yeah.
I think, kind of in my head, decide how I want to say this, but kind of the tools to bring back to our schools and having the tools in our toolbox to fight some of those microaggressions, or if we hear some of those stereotypes, some phrases or some things that we can say to other student athletes that kind of make them think about what they say the next time they say it.
Yeah. Can I put you on the spot?
Yeah.
Why? Why do you want to learn that?
I think it's needed. I think having hard conversations are really challenging, and as an administrator, seeing that student athletes kind of shy away from having hard conversations, as I shy away from having hard conversations, if I feel like I have more tools in my tool belt and toolbox to combat some of those hard conversations, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. What else?
Effective tools for comfort when we've seen somebody been wronged by or experienced that harm from some of these microaggressions or other experiences?
Yeah. So I want to make sure I'm understanding. So maybe not just the you witness a microaggression in play, not just how to disrupt that, but then how to comfort the victim in that situation. Is that kind of what you were getting at?
Correct. Yeah,
Perfect.
That was much better than
No. Thank you. I just want to make sure I'm going to ask you the same follow-up question. Why?
Reading people is, I think, if you were to ask me this 10 years ago when I first, or maybe 15 years ago when I first started the business, I would have said I'm very good at reading people. I don't think I am as much now, personally, but I also think that sometimes but I think because of a lot of other things, I mean, in both perceived and natural world, I don't think it's as easy to read people these days so much and just make sure that they really, or I think some people try their best to mask that they are, to front up that they're okay with something and just shrug it off when sometimes they're probably not. And I think it's better to address that at that point at that moment, or be able to show that there's comfort there. And I could be wrong, and sometimes they really are okay, at least knowing that they've felt supported.
Yeah. And I think also both of, and two administrators, also you guys care. And I hope you all, students, hear that. You have people who care about you and want to get better in this space so that they can support you. All right, anyone else want to share kind of their goals for this session? All right. Definitions. We're going to go through these. Like I said, just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Sorry, you have probably heard me go through these like 6 times. So, all right. Diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. What do these words mean? Let's start with diversity. Yell it out. Anybody have a good definition for me? There's a lot of right answers to all of these. So.
Like a melting pot of cultures?
Yeah. What else? Melting pot of cultures? I will stare at you. Yeah.
Like differences between people?
Yeah. Differences. Perfect. Equity.
Level playing field.
Level playing field. I like that. Okay, we'll leave that one there. I like that. Inclusion.
Including everybody, just including everybody around you, not just like who you want to include, but everybody in the space to make them feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Inviting them to dance.
I love that. Inviting them to dance. Belonging.
Making people feel at home where they are.
Yeah, I like that. Feel. That's important. Okay. Diversity. You guys are right. Making sure that we have lots of representation, and it's not just race and gender, but different political ideas, religions, all of these things. There are so many different parts of our identity, making sure that we have all of those kind of represented. Equity, level playing field. Equity, I'll make a note because I think it gets confused a lot for equality. Those are not the same thing. Let's see. Track and field. How many do you have, if you had to guess, on the women's team?
About 15 of us.
15. What about on the men's side?
I would say like 18 on the women's team, about 13 on the men's team.
13. Okay, so more on the women's side. So 13 on the men's side. So if I am your coach and I order 13 pairs of spikes for the men's team, and then, okay, well, the men's needed 13. Let's be equal here. I'm going to get the women 13 pairs. That's not going to work for you, right? But that's equal. But that's not what you need. Everyone has different needs. And so it's not just giving people the same thing, it's getting people to the same end goal. And sometimes that means giving more. Sometimes that means giving different. Equity. Inclusion. Making sure everyone making sure everyone is heard. belonging is that feeling. So diversity is inviting everyone to the table. Equity is giving everybody a chair at the table, whatever kind of chair they need. Inclusion is giving everyone at the table an opportunity to speak into the mic. Belonging is the feeling that I'm at this table and I feel comfortable speaking. Does that make sense? Belonging it's hard. That's a hard one because you're measuring other people's feeling, but it's important to work towards. Okay. Next round. Prejudice, discrimination, unconscious bias, microaggressions. We'll go through in the same way. Prejudice.
Prejudging them just by what they look like or sound like without knowing.
Yep. Discrimination.
Treating people differently.
Yeah. Unconscious bias.
Preconceived rationale.
Yeah. Microaggressions.
Like almost regardless of intent, using unconscious bias to act on things.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yes. Let me go to my definitions. Okay. Prejudice. Exactly right. Just a kind of irrational attitude towards a group of people. Discrimination then is acting on that. Spot on. Unconscious bias. We all have these ideas in our head. Right or wrong, they're not our fault. We all have them. We develop these over time through what we watch on TV, where our parents might have taken us to church, the area that we grew up in, who we grew up around, what media we consume. All of these things contribute to these ideas that we have in our head. Everyone has it, so it's important to think about that, to think about maybe some of the unconscious biases that we may have, and to get comfortable maybe feeling a little bit wrong sometimes, or like, oh, why did I have that thought? That's not right. But we have to think about it so that we can identify it, so that we can make sure that our unconscious biases aren't bringing us into this space or into the microaggression space, which little statements, actions, incidents, subtle acts of discrimination. And I'll be honest, microaggressions, it's an important word in the work that I do, but I don't love it, because if you've been a victim of microaggressions, you know that after a while, they don't really feel so micro. You know, they add up pretty quickly. And so the use of the word subtle, I don't love that so much, because it's subtle in an isolated incident, but it's never really an isolated incident, right? And then lastly, stereotypes. Widely held, fixed, oversimplified image. We know this. Any questions on either sets of the definitions we talked about?
Alexis?
Yeah.
I think in microaggressions, I would agree with you. I don't like the term micro, but I also think that we're remiss to not think of microaggressions as intentional. They're very intentional actions that are not overt, but I think microaggressions are when someone acts in that manner, my perception is they are intentional.
Yes. We'll have to grab coffee or something because I could go on and on about this. So I struggle because sometimes, like if I'm putting myself in a situation where something, has happened to me, I oftentimes find myself thinking like, did you really, there's no way you actually thought that was appropriate, right? But I do think a lot of times that people operate from a place of ignorance too. Which I could also go on a separate rant about. Like there are just some things that in 2024, why are we still ignorant about? Because Google is Google. But yes, I appreciate your point. Anything else on these definitions? Okay. Let's get into it. Okay. New rule that I should have put on the thing. What we say in this space stays in this space. And what we're doing is talking about things so that we can learn from them and get into it, right? I am going to ask you guys to tell me some stereotypes in sport. Just because you say it doesn't mean you believe it, but we have to say some of these things so that we can talk about it, okay? So with that being said, let's dive in. What are some stereotypes that you guys have heard in any of your sports? It doesn't have to be your sport in particular. What are some stereotypes we've heard?
Female athletes are lesbian.
Yeah, female athletes are lesbians. That's not me, that's just me repeating it back. I'm not co-signing that belief. But yeah, female athletes are lesbians. What else? Yeah, yell it out.
White boys can't hoop.
Yes. You can keep yelling them out, guys. What else? You could say it, Lisa.
Black guys are dumb. Black
Yeah.
athletes are dumb. Especially men.
Sorry, I can't spell and talk. I work in the academic field. That is a stereotype that I have to deal with on a regular basis, and it drives me insane. What else? Yeah. Remind me what field you work in.
I'm academic. I say that on that.
Yeah, so you deal with it all the time.
Athletes are entitled.
Yeah. What else?
Hispanic soccer players are dirty.
Yeah. I know there's more.
Women's sports are boring.
All right, what do we have here? Female athletes are lesbians, white boys can't hoop, women's sports are boring, and athletes are dumb. All right, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna start some of our group discussions. I'm gonna pass out what your stereotype is. I would like for you to talk about this stereotype. Feel free to maybe share some examples of if you've seen this play out, or where we might be kind of dealing with these things. I want you to talk about where we think these things might originate from. So for example, we talked about black people can't swim, right? But where does that come from? That comes from the fact that they didn't let us swim for decades. So where do these stereotypes come from? I want you to talk about why it's harmful. Why are these things harmful? And maybe the first question is, are they harmful? I would say these are, but if you don't think they are, then that's fine. We can talk about it. Why are they harmful? And when you talk about that, I would like you to talk about it through the lens of different identities, right? So if we're talking about, women's sports are boring or people don't care about women's sports, is that harmful to women? Does it differently impact different types of women? Let's kind of think, broadly about that. And then how might this stereotype impact our industry? So how are these things impacting our teams, our departments, how we interact with each other? Any questions on what I'd like you guys to talk about? Okay. I am going to pass these out now. Sorry, my handwriting is not like top tier. All right, let's dive in. I'm gonna say 10 minutes. You guys are still talking, but I wanna make sure we have time to get through everything. Okay, what I would like to do now is have someone from each group kind of share out to the rest of us what your group discussed. So let's start with this group here. If you could just remind us what your stereotype was and then walk us through these things.
Our stereotype was athletes are dumb. And like that first question, like where might a stereotype like that come from? And one of like the main things we brought up was like social media. And even like growing up, like whenever you're like watching a sports show or like he mentioned like Blue Mountain State, like the jocks are like the jocks. The athletes are like the dumbest people in the room. And that's kind of how like we were drilled like unconsciously to like think in a way. And then why is the stereotype harmful? We mentioned like it creates like mental barriers. Like even if it seems normal in the moment, you might think about it like, oh well, yeah, maybe I am dumb. And even though that's not like a healthy way to think about it, it is in the end. It's like that's what some people might think. And then we didn't really touch on the like last question, but that was mostly what we kind of went over just to give like a small recap.
Okay. Yeah. Does anybody want to take a crack at that last question?
I said it gives athletes a bad look. Just from like the TV shows, the professors looking like bashing athletes, they were just here for sports and not for academics that go to college. I think it just gives us a bad look and a bad rap.
Yeah.
We even spoke about how like professors would be like, oh, you're an athlete, like you're not going to try hard, you're going to want to skip our class, like you're just going to want to see the pass. Like that affects our industry in the way that like from an administrative standpoint, like your back's against the wall while trying to work with faculty on that. So
Yeah.
touch on that.
One of the things we didn't speak of, but just thinking of it now, is right now to say if we're really fighting for athletes not to be employees and really that they are there for academics, and if there's a stereotype that all of our athletes are dumb, we should just pay them and they should be employees and they're not really there for academics, it could really hinder our industry.
Yeah.
Can I add to that? I'm not in that group.
Yeah, of course. Yes, discussion, please.
But on that too, with that stereotype, especially for the people who are able to actually go pro, and even some of this NIL stuff too. It's I think that businesses and leagues would try to take advantage of the athletes, thinking they're incapable of understanding the contract, the terms of it. And people would sign them and really get ripped off, so I think, that to me is a concern with that particular stereotype.
Yeah.
If I add one thing too, one concern industry-wise for higher ed is that there aren't a lot of students overall going to college right now, but this is a steal from somebody else, one of my other colleagues, but there's never going to be a shortage of student athletes wanting to go to school.
Period. Yeah, so let's frame this with some of our definitions that we learned earlier. we have a stereotype here: athletes are dumb. And just for context, for the new people who joined us, we're just talking through stereotypes in sport and how those stereotypes kind of come into play. I didn't want anyone to hear me say like, oh, athletes are dumb and think that that's what my session is about, right? That's not what we're doing. Okay, so we have this stereotype, right? Athletes are dumb. And then maybe we hear that a few times. We see it in media, really great point. And that kind of becomes an unconscious bias, something that's just kind of floating in the back of our head, right? But maybe the more and more we hear it, and maybe we have a bad experience with one student athlete that would fit into that, and then maybe that unconscious bias becomes a prejudice. And let's think about maybe like a professor who has this prejudice. At some point, it's really easy for that prejudice to become a microaggression or even active discrimination, right? So say we have a professor who just is not willing to accommodate an athlete who, let's say the athlete has sustained some sort of injury, a concussion. Concussion is like a really great example of this because you can't see it, right? And so maybe you've been cleared from your concussion, but you're still a little foggy. Are you working through this right now? Because I saw that look. I'm working through one on my campus too. Maybe you have a concussion and you're cleared to play, you're cleared to return to the classroom, but you're still just feeling a little foggy. And this professor just thinks you're lazy. And you're not. You have an injury to your brain and you just need a little bit of flexibility. But this professor has it in their mind. Athletes are dumb. Athletes aren't going to try. We've got an issue here. And where do these things come from? You guys did a great job talking about media. But I think, for administrators in the room, can you guys raise your hands? How many of you work with academics? Okay. Why? There are just some professors who believe that like everybody's on scholarship, everybody's just got it made, right? Like, it's just not the case. There are so many misunderstandings about what you all do. And so we have a responsibility, those of us who raised our hands that we work in this space, to help educate our professors a little bit. But there's just a lot of misinformation about what we do and what our days look like. Any other thoughts on this one? Are we all kind of understanding where I'm trying to go with these? Okay. Next group, let's come here.
For us, we had women's sports are boring. And for our first question, where my stereotype like this we came from, the world is already such a male-dominated place. Like women couldn't do so much like back in the day. Like we couldn't work jobs. We were just meant to be in the kitchen and not meant to get physical. And that's where like things like flag football came into place, so women could come into place and play football and not just play like so positions like on the teams. And nobody in this world, we live in a world of like, if it doesn't affect us, we don't really want to change it. So that's where men don't really care about it, and that's where belonging and inclusion comes from, because we don't want to include women when it comes to things like this. It's always been here, but we just see it through our rose-colored shades. We don't want to actually be that. And this stereotype is harmful because it kind of hurts us when you're I think I speak for all women, because I feel like we should be able to experience everything that a man can as well. If anything, probably times 10, I feel like women work just as hard as men. If not, probably even harder sometimes. And we always get the short end of the stick because of the biases that are put on us and the stereotypes that are put on us, because women are meant to be soft and meant to be in the kitchen and take care of babies, or just not be getting our hands dirty as well. And this stereotype impacts our industry now because, as an example, I don't know if you guys seen it on Twitter a while ago, when the women's had championships the men were given a bigger court to play on than women. Women were given like half a court to play on and practice on. Sedona had posted it. She was from Oregon's basketball team, and yeah, the weight room was just a small little, a few little racks they gave, and it was nothing. Just like, as in pay wise, Angel Reese didn't take certain deals. She didn't want to go to the NBA yet because she was offered more in college than she was offered more in the NBA. Well, the WNBA, because men don't like watching the WNBA period because they think it's more boring, not as exciting as the NBA. And it just got more exciting this year because Angel Reese came to Clark Card, and because I know we all tuned into the LSU versus South Carolina game, and that's when it just started getting traction. But before that, it just kind of like, it set us back, and I don't think we are still at the point of we're equal with men yet, but I feel like we are getting there, but just not yet.
Yeah. Whew. There were so many things in there that I was like, right, yeah. I feel like maybe you should do the rest of that. Okay, so yeah, where does the stereotype come from? We know just that our country is this way. This is kind of the history that we've come through that's just put us in this position, right, where women are not always looked at as equal. Why is the stereotype harmful? Because we're not given the same opportunities. I mean, let's look at last year. We know that in previous years, the women's championship was not given the same social media hype as the men's. We know that. But last year, what happened? I feel like I could not, in the month of March, I could not open my Twitter app without seeing Angel Reese or Caitlin Clark.
I couldn't escape it. Like, it was every day. I had to watch the game.
Yeah.
I had to watch it.
Exactly. And so it was everywhere. And what happened? We all watched. It was historic numbers because finally there was media attention. And now I will say, how unfortunate is it that most of that media attention was just pitting two women against each other? Because that's not how we advertise men's games. Like, we're not like, oh, LeBron James and Kevin Durant are gonna no, that's not how we advertise men's sports. I could do a whole separate session on that. But yeah, okay. Does everyone see where we're going? Yeah.
It's kind of like where you went back to why people think that black people can't swim because they didn't have access. You really think about the origin, like women didn't have access to sports until way later than men.
We had to make a law.
Yes,
We had to make a law to allow it. That's, yes.
So that's like the origination of the fact that they thought that it would hinder women from having babies. They thought that it would, like the whole, like, women can't run marathons. It's going to hurt their bodies, and they're not equipped to do it. So it's like originated even from then, and now we've had to fight so much to get where we are.
Yes. And I want to, I may be wrong. And I don't want to seem like I'm taking what you're saying and changing what you're saying. I want to add on to something that you said. And if I'm not properly characterizing your thought on it, tell me that I'm wrong. When you said women work, in many cases, harder, there is a saying in the black community that you have to work twice as hard for half as much.
That's exactly what I think. Yeah.
Twice as hard for half as much. I know I was told from a very young age that that was going to be my reality. And I think that in certain spaces, that's the reality for women too. We can be the top in our field, qualified, practice just as hard, practice harder, and we still might not get that recognition. And that's frustrating. Any other thoughts on that stereotype? Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to point out that, like, now with the pros, men's basketball, people are all, looking at all the threes. The women were doing that long before, hitting those threes. I mean, that was the thing, but it wasn't until the men did it that they're making a big thing about it now.
Yeah. One thing that I like to do to piss people off, am I allowed to say bad? I don't like a faux pas word. I love to talk about the WNBA and the MNBA. It's my favorite thing. It's just a subtle little, because one is the W, it's the same. I always correct my colleagues when they'll talk about basketball, but they're only talking about their men's team. I'm like, oh, are you talking about the men's team, or are we doing that advertisement for the women's game too? No? Okay, so you meant men's basketball. All right, next group, yes.
I want to mix it up a little bit based upon what our question was and your statement. The women's game for a very long time was called boring, but women's basketball was because it was under the rim.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So under the rim wasn't good, but if you think about the 3 point, that has nothing to do with your ability to jump. And the NBA right now is dominated by people that only shoot that. And so we're playing issues off of issues based upon some narrative. But the women's game has been under Lisa Leslie, Candace Parker, like we can name on one hand the ladies that have done. But that was the men's game. Still is for the most part at the college level as what was exciting. And so it's just an interesting set of competing students.
Yes. Julie, you're giving me a lot of content for future trainings.
You can put me on your payroll. But I want you to know I don't work for half the price.
All right, who is sharing out for this group here?
We had white boys can't hoop, and so kind of what we talked about is that the stereotype kind of originates that you're a product of your environment, and the fact is that when we see basketball or football, we primarily associate it with Black African American athletes because of where they grew up in the areas. And basketball court mostly in urban areas. Not on a basketball court in the suburbs as much, and so that's where we found that it originated from. And so kind of how that stereotype is harmful is that it creates this sense of divide on a team because now you're putting into mind that your white male athletes on the basketball team aren't going to be jumpers or shooters. So you're creating this kind of divide between your African American and your white players, which can create a lot of tension on the team. I also think that when we talked about it, it harms in a way to all sports because it's prevalent that we start bringing race into the factor, and so there's a lot of blame on genetics or why they can jump higher than white boys, and so that's why they're more gifted in this sport. Or if a white boy is good at the sport, it's because they come from privilege, they have money, so they have more ability and access to nicer buildings, nicer facilities, nicer teams to travel on and stuff like that. So that's kind of where we associated that part. And then how it impacts the industry is that we're basically putting people in a bubble, and by that we're limiting people and basically making them discouraged from competing in these sports that they actually have a passion for and they're liking. So you're actually turning away markets because you're now only marketing towards certain demographic rather than both.
Yes, great job. Guys, you guys are doing a really great job. Thank you. We see a lot of similar stereotypes. I think you could go through most sports and there's some type of idea about what the person playing that sport should look like. We could say sports like lacrosse and golf, rich white boy sports, right? We could talk about, I think lacrosse, that's gonna send me on a whole other rant, guys, I'm sorry. So really, really great points here, but what happens? We we can end up discouraging people from playing those sports. I also want to bring a note. I did a similar session with my coaches. I could go on a whole thing about recruiting habits here. When we have these ideas in our head of what a certain athlete for a certain sport should look like, coaches, even maybe administrators in some cases, might really limit what's happening with their team. I could do a lot of DE&I rants, guys, but I could do like 3 hours on football positions and ideas about race builds for different positions. Deion Sanders, who gives me a lot of my content here, did was on a podcast or something, and he was talking about what he looks for when he's recruiting. So this is Coach Prime, football coach, Colorado. And he said when he's looking for a quarterback, he looks for someone from a 2-parent home, a 3.5 GPA, and he's kind of going on and on about what that person's household should be like. And then he says, my D-line though, single mom, hungry, someone who like didn't have food growing. Like, it was insane to hear someone that I would consider an adult. Maybe he doesn't consider himself to be one, but an adult in a position, a very public position, saying these crazy things. And we see in the media, there have been studies that have analyzed how we talk about, or not we, how broadcasters talk about black quarterbacks compared to white quarterbacks. White quarterbacks, they're great. They have a game IQ. They just know the game and they've studied it. They're developed in it. Those black quarterbacks, though, natural talent. Running quarterbacks. What? No. Because what are we saying? We're saying that white quarterback is only successful because they have the game IQ. There's no natural talent there. On the other side, are we saying that black quarterback just got real lucky, isn't passionate about the game, hasn't taken the time to learn, doesn't have that game IQ, just really, really fast, really lucky, right? So what are we telling people? I'll leave my thoughts there on that. Does anybody else want to talk about that one? Sorry, I went on a little rant, guys. Really great job summarizing that. Last group.
We had female athletes are lesbian. And I think this kind of ties into like everything that we're talking about at every table. I think like from like where the stereotype originates from the beginning of time, like girls are given like Barbies and babies and like things to play with when they're young, and guys are given like alligators and trucks. And I think like there's a stereotype around girls that you have to look a certain way or like whatever. And I think in athletics, we're working out, we're going to the gym, and I think maybe for some guys, that's where that stereotype has come from, that we are like manly girls or something. I don't know. So we are lesbians. I don't know. And the stereotype's harmful because it's just like, it makes people that feel like people that are actually lesbian, it feels like, and this is like how it impacts us too, like you feel like you can't necessarily like be out and comfortable in an environment like on a team. Like I know like I play water polo and so many people think it's like a lesbian sport, whereas like we talk about like lacrosse is like a rich white people sport. And so now are we taking somebody that like is out and comfortable with their sexuality, feel like they can't go onto a team that's not accepting of these like stereotypes and stuff like that. So
I don't know if there was an incident like that at our school, and it kind of like two students were next to each other because like they used like soft
Yeah. Yes. Yes. So where does this come from? The idea that this is an industry for men, for boys. And so the only way that a woman could want to be in sport is if she's a lesbian, or what some might consider to be a more masculine trait. How silly is that? And what are we saying? It's not a bad thing. So we're saying this, they're a bunch of softball players are a bunch of lesbians. So what if they are? Like what? You know? So yes, so it's harmful because it keeps people out, it boxes people in, and then it perpetuates this idea that there's something wrong with being a woman in sport, but also wrong with being a lesbian. And we just know that that's not true. Or I hope we all know that's not true. Actually, if you take anything away from my session tonight, let it be that. All right. Thank you all for that. I'm really pleased with the discussions that we had. And I want to just take a second to thank you all, because I know that these conversations can be a little bit uncomfortable. And I know it's kind of weird to say these things over and over. Like I don't know. I don't want to have another day in my life where I just say softball players are lesbians as many times as I've said it today. So I appreciate you guys getting a little bit uncomfortable and sharing that out. Like, what now, right? What's next? We spent a lot of time talking about these stereotypes, maybe thinking about where they come from, why they're harmful. So what do we do next? I'm sorry, because I know you've already heard this. Techniques. I just want to share a few techniques that I like. I didn't make these up, guys, but they came to my attention and now I'm stealing them. A few techniques that we can use to kind of disrupt these things when we hear them. I can email this out too, because I've had some people tell me that they're going to use these at Thanksgiving. So you may want to take some of these with you. Okay, so just a few techniques here. The first one, questioning. So let's say we're going with black people can't swim. So I might say something like, Lisa, when I hear you say that black people can't swim, it kind of feels to me like, you're making an inappropriate assumption about a group of people, and is that really what you mean? What I think is good about that technique is if you're not comfortable being super direct, but you feel in that moment that you have to very specifically address what's being said, but not comfortable just coming out and saying like, Lisa, girl, are you dumb? Like, black people know how to swim, right? So it allows you to have just maybe a little cushion there to kind of lighten the blow. Educating. So Lisa, can I keep picking on you? Yep. I might say, Lisa, I just heard you say that black people can't swim, but we, one, know that they can swim. We know that there are very successful swimmers. And we can also talk about a lot of the ways in which historically black people have been kept out of swimming as a sport, and that's really important to tackle. And then you can kind of have a further conversation if that person is open to doing that. Expressing emotion. And now I'm just sticking with the same black people can't swim, right? So some of these might not be the perfect thing, but expressing emotion. Lisa, when I hear you say that black people can't swim, that's really bothering me because you're giving off X, Y, and Z kind of opinion about this, and that's just not quite right, and that's upsetting to me. Similarly, empathetic relating. So you say black people can't swim. Lisa, you have 2 daughters who are black, and I just wonder how they might feel if they heard you say something like that. So maybe not turning it back on yourself, but kind of getting them to think about it in a way that might appeal to them if you happen to know, some personal information about them. And then returning later. Maybe for whatever reason, and we can talk through some of this, it's not appropriate for me to address Lisa in that moment. So I might talk to her later or pull her aside and say, hey, earlier I heard you say this, can we talk about it? And then you could probably use one of those other techniques to finish that conversation. I'm gonna leave these up, but what I would like to do back in our groups briefly, and I'll come around and give you a scenario, but maybe talk about how you would work through some of these things. And when I give you your scenario, I want you to think about, once again, your own identities and maybe how different parts of our identity might impact which approach we choose to take. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So if athletes are dumb, I want you guys to talk about maybe a comment that you heard from a professor. Maybe you heard a professor say, oh, you guys are traveling again. These athletes don't care about class at all. How you would respond to that. And I think it's important to talk about how you respond to that as a student, as an administrator. White boys can't hoop. Maybe we are playing a pickup game and we're with one of our white friends who's playing. Maybe he makes a little mistake and then someone that you're playing against kind of says, oh, get this white boy out of here. How would you address that comment? Do you address that comment? Please discuss. Earlier I heard you guys talking about a good example of, it wasn't maybe the women's lacrosse team kind of talking about the softball team. Say one of your friends on the women's lacrosse team said that to you about the softball team, and maybe one of your friends is a softball player. How do you address that?
That's what I do. I said the same thing. Yeah. And you're doing the job for your university, I am too.
Yeah. So if we had,
Women's sports are boring.
yeah, so maybe there's a really big women's game, women's basketball game coming up this weekend, and you're trying to get a group of your friends to go. What they are, how they came to be. Maybe getting a pulse on, this thing just happened. How do I address it? Is everyone on the same page? Do we feel like we accomplished that at least? I also hope that, and I know we went through it quickly, that you might feel a little bit more comfortable, at the very least, thinking through ways to disrupt inappropriate comments when you hear them. This one takes practice. I did a whole, where are we, hour and a half so far, training to you all, and there are still times where I hear things and I'm like, I'm the person in the room that has to address this, right? It's hard. It's uncomfortable. But I hope that we got a little bit more comfortable in the uncomfortable with that today. I want to wrap up by saying, this is hard. It's hard to talk about. And imagine if it's hard to talk about, how hard it can be to be on the receiving end of it. It's important that we check in with each other. Administrators, there are little things that we can do to let people know that we are safe. And I could go on a list of things, whether it's just like having a pride flag in your office, or I think there are like stickers you can get for your windows that say safe space. Putting your pronouns in your signature. There are a lot of things that we could do, but I want to make sure that the things that I'm telling you, we're not just doing them and being performative about it. Things like this. Conversations, development. I don't have a perfect answer to how can we check and make sure people are really okay. But I would say it's empathy and compassion asking the hard question, are you okay? How are you? When my students come into my office, I always, all right, let's talk about it. How are classes going? Da-da-da-da-da. We'll get through it. How's basketball? How's whatever? Da-da-da-da. How are you? And they're usually like, I'm good, Miss Watson. And I say, how are you? And then I sit. And if I find that if you sit and stare at someone long enough, that they'll start talking because they're just a little bit uncomfortable with you staring at them, right? How are you? How are you doing? How long does this go before you get uncomfortable? Eventually you're going to start telling me your life story, right? So ask the question. It goes a long way. Student athletes. You're in a really interesting position that you guys signed yourself up for. You're representatives for your teams. And in some cases, you have what I would say is a really unfair responsibility of kind of keeping the image of your program. Because as you know, one lacrosse player does something one weekend, and for the next however many years, these lacrosse players, right? So there's kind of this unfair responsibility that you guys have. Keep a pulse on yourself and how you're doing, because what you do is hard. And you know it's hard. And so check in with each other. And maybe it's not the awkward check-in that I just did, that, how are you doing? Right? But check in with your teams and see how things are going. And it doesn't always have to be, if you hear something, it doesn't always have to be this direct, don't say this, you cannot say this, that really upset him. But maybe it's just did you hear that? Are you good? Do we need to talk about it after? The takeaway here. Let's practice empathy. Let's think about the things that we're hearing. Think about why we're hearing them and what it might mean for others to hear them. And let's keep practicing. I'll send out some resources. Well, I'll have Adrian send out some resources. And let me know if you need anything. It's my email address. I am, they pay me to do this. So you could really, it's a waste of the NEC's money if you don't send me an email. So please reach out. This is my cell phone number. Feel free to use it. I'm here to help. This is what they pay me to do. I'm here to help. I'm here to help your campuses. What I will say, student athletes, if you reach out, I've had it happen before. Student athletes, if you reach out to me about something that happens on your campus, there are things that I have to report. There are things that I have to share back to your to someone on your campus. It will usually be your senior woman administrator, if that feels appropriate. But I'm here I don't want that to discourage you. I just want to be honest about the steps that are going to happen. And we can kind of talk through those scenarios to make sure that what we're doing is something that you're comfortable with. But when you talk to me, I do have to make sure that I'm looping in someone from your campus. I just want to make that clear to everybody. But I hope that won't discourage you, because I am here as a resource.
I wanted to encourage student athletes to do two things. I'm going to reiterate what Alexis said. It's the check-in piece. We talked about really specific techniques on how to address some of these issues. But think about a piece that we didn't touch on too much today, which was, is your teammate extroverted or is your teammate introverted? And if they're introverted, they may not want the attention of the response or the defense mechanism or something to be addressed in that moment, but that doesn't mean that they're okay. Or, like Alexis said at the very, very beginning, if microaggressions happen often enough, it's like death by a paper cut, And so that continual check-in and level setting with your teammates, it can go a really long way, peer-to-peer support, rather than just feeling like you need to address the issue in the issue, because that may not be comfortable for everyone.
Thank you. So we got to add Julie to the payroll. Any questions for me? All right. I will turn it over to Adrian. Thank you all. Thank you.